Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to Criticality Live, presented by Secure Nation, the show where we cut through the noise, challenge assumptions, and talk honestly about the state of cybersecurity. We're super excited today to kick off a new chapter with two new hosts, who together, in my opinion, bring a rare combination of experience, clarity, and straight talk leadership. I'm Joshua Copeland, also known as the Unpopular Opinion Guy. I'm a cybersecurity executive, military cyber leader, author, professor with experience across SLTT, federal government, private sector, and startup sector. My amazing co-host is Williams, a former CISO, board level advisor, public speaker, consultant, and one of the most respected voices in cybersecurity risk, government, and leadership. Together, we're here to bridge the gap between security theory, real world execution with conversations that are sharp, honest, rooted in experience, and just may have a little bit of unpopular opinion. Caleb, let's go ahead and get into it and introduce our guest.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh, for your kind words. I really appreciate that. So today we're joined by someone who has worn just about every hat this industry has to offer and has somehow made each one look so easy. So Will, um, I apologize. I may butcher your last name, and I take that and I want you to correct me, please, if I say it wrong. Is Klusovsky is a 20-year, cybersecurity veteran who has built, led, sold, and advised across the entire ecosystem of MSPs, MSSPs, SaaS providers, enterprise security teams, and high growth consultancies. He's one of the rare leaders who can speak fluent tech and fluent business, which, as we all know, translating between them without losing anything in the process is so Will's known for helping organizations cut through complexity, align security with real business outcomes, and make smarter decisions without drowning in buzzwords, tools, and all of that noise. He's also a mentor, educator, and a total straight shooter whose philosophy blends practical experience with a deep understanding of how companies actually operate today. So he's here to talk his origin story, leadership philosophy, and the technical to business translation skills that every modern cybersecurity leader needs. So, Will, thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. Excited to have some conversations. And I think you got the name just about right. It's Klusovsky. It's odd. It's sounds exactly like it's spelled, which in English is kind of weird. So.
Well, thank you for being here with us today. So you've been in the trenches since before cybersecurity was even called cybersecurity. So when was the first moment that you realized that this is the true path for you?
Yeah. So it was early in my career when I was in the Marine Corps for sure. One of the last jobs I had, I sat in a really small room with very thick walls and lots of red wires and lots of security controls around it. So for those who've been in and around what we do, they understand where I'm coming from. It was me and one other guy who's a contractor. And I was doing like information assurance, making sure WSUS was updated and reporting back on compliance with training and all that good stuff. And I realized it says like, I think this security thing, like there's something to it. I remember just before I left, they brought in a snort box. For those who don't know, that is what IDS used to be before it was just part of your firewall. It was a whole separate appliance. It was this whole different thing that was on its own. And so, yeah, basically, I mean, selfishly, it was not entirely altruistic. It was like, hey, there's going to be money in this for a long time. I feel like this is going to hang around. And I'm interested in it. And so that's kind of what I committed to it. Actually finished my degree. I was getting out of the Marine Corps at the time, finished my degree and found a school that would let me graduate with a technical degree as quickly as possible and then started looking for work.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting hearing how people kind of come into cybersecurity. Josh and I have talked extensively about how I have a very non-traditional path. I came up the internal audit, external audit, GRC path. And then making the switch it's that moment like, oh, I can be happy at work, enjoy what I'm doing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned it because it's like people always ask me, they're like, "Are you technical?" And I'm like, "Well, if I'm talking to a pen tester, no. If I'm talking to a firewall engineer, no. If I'm talking to a CFO, yeah." Right?
Right.
If I'm talking to a COO, like that's because like I commonly say I know a whole little about a lot because of my career. I've spent so much time. I was always the person you put in front of the C, whoever XO, because I could talk about whatever their business problems were. And one minute you're talking MSS, the next minute you're talking PCI, the next minute you're talking NIST and ISO, and then you're talking pen testing. So I had to know a little bit about everything. But GRC is the one thing I probably spent like a significant amount of time on versus like, I never really worked in a SOC. I wasn't exactly a firewall engineer, even though I did firewall deployments in the past, but definitely because I've created GRC practices and because I've ran those organizations, and I was a QSA in the past back when it meant something. So it was like,
You said it, not me. Ooh, them a fighting words, Will.
I'm not that it doesn't mean anything. Dude, PCI is a very important thing, but it follows the path of a lot of compliance frameworks. I think the same thing we're going to see with CMMC, which is when it comes out, it's new and it's a pain in the butt, and everybody runs and scurries, and then eventually everybody figures it out. HIPAA did the same thing, SOX did the same thing. I remember working at a retailer, and because of Sarbanes-Oxley and PCI, we had to get rid of all our whatever the ancient remote desktop technology was that was unsecure, right? It drives change. It's a good thing. But then eventually everybody kind of figures it out, and it's not as, I'm not gonna say it's not, it's definitely still important. It's just not as much of a headache.
Absolutely.
So, Will, you've worked as both a buyer and a seller in the industry, MSSPs, MSPs, advisory, now as a consulting. How is seeing both sides of the table shaped your approach?
I love this because it goes right into what I preach about constantly. I was talking to somebody this morning about content, like those who know me, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. And when I talk about cybersecurity and technology, it goes crazy. And when I talk about go to market and sales and marketing, it's okay. Right. And I think, and part of it is the niche is so small, but to Josh, to your question, it's like, I've learned that, a lot of what organizations do, they do it wrong. They still use these antiquated, look at my blinky lights. You'll hear me say that a lot. Look at all the features I have, and they don't talk about what's in it for me, right? If I think about the buyer, like of an image I post all the time. It says GTM is about your client, right? So, and that goes for whether you're selling services or whether you're selling a product, SaaS, B2B, whatever. You want to position things so that it's like, what are the benefits to me? And so I think that's one thing I learned. Most of us came up somewhere, even in GRC, like you're still kind of techie, right? You still got this geek mindset of, oh, look at how cool this thing is, and look at this neat little thing I can do. And I think for me, when I realized that things like IT and cybersecurity and a lot of other technology, like we exist simply to enable the business. And there isn't a business out there whose job is to go to work every day and be secure, right? That's not the goal. Their job is to make money or serve constituents, usually, like, that's kind of the two things. And then they have their lofty goals. And so once you realize that your role in the company as a security technical person, or the product you're selling or the service you're selling or whatever it is there to facilitate that bigger business mission, then it really changes the way you think about things. And it's like, oh, that's really neat. You got this cool little blinky light that sits there. But the CEO doesn't care. It doesn't produce more widgets. It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't get more people there, the services they need, whatever it is. Right.
Yeah, we tend to get stuck in the bright shiny object syndrome of here's the new toy, let me do the new thing, and meanwhile you still don't know what assets you have, and your patch management is still absolute hot garbage. So appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, I have to say, and I don't know, Will and Josh, Josh, and you and I have talked about this before, but I feel like we as like the collective we out there, um, still don't get the basics right. We still, like, if you look at the basics, and we'll use CIS, right? Like those first, like, what, it's 18 controls now. Like the first, like, 4 are around like inventory or software or hardware, and then it moves, it moves a bit to, I'd say, to like the left a bit. And if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it, and that's the basics. And I don't know how many organizations I've gone into as a consultant where they're like, oh, I don't know what my inventory is, I don't know what I have. Well, then you don't know what your exposure is, and it kind of keeps spinning the wheels on GRC and the needs there. I really feel, and I know I'm a GRC CISO, so I'm going to keep saying it. GRC, there's always going to be work in this space with all the laws, regulations, et cetera. So,
well, and I'm right there with you, because in my CISO, like, the reason to me that you have to be a GRC CISO, like, you could be a technical CISO or a business CISO and learn those things, but if you don't understand, like you said, and I'm laughing because I say it all the time, and I don't think I've ever been on any kind of podcast, show, interview where I didn't talk about asset management. Because you said it, if you don't know what you have, then you have no idea what you need to protect, right? And if you don't have a roadmap that says, hey, here's the way we're going to go about business, you have nothing to compare it to, then you're just like guessing, right? And so many organizations do that, right? They don't, like, and when I build programs, that's the first thing I do. I spend as much time as I can doing asset management, getting an asset inventory, data flow diagrams, and BIA. Like, what's the impact analysis? And then I can come back and say, look, these are the things that make your business run. And you're not doing anything to protect them, or you are doing stuff to protect them, or there's, like, that's just the foundational element to it, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good segue into, like, my next question. So over your extensive 20+ year career, congratulations, by the way, or commiseration,
For being
one
old.
or the other, right? One or the other, maybe right in the middle. What has changed the most? Like, are you still seeing the same problems, or has that landscape changed a bit?
That's interesting. I think, well, there's two sides of that. One, it's funny to me that I've kind of been saying the same thing for 20 years, because at the end of the day, it's still just about risk, right? It doesn't matter. Like I remember when augmented reality came out, like, I didn't even know about it. I was doing consulting, and a potential client brought it to us and was like, hey, there's this thing, and when I put it over the thing, stuff pops up. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, what's the security? I was like, I don't know, but let me think about this. It's an application, you're using the web, like, you take the fundamentals and you kind of figure out, this is probably how it works, right? So it's still, the point is, it's still just about risk and what the potential exposure is.
Mm.
But I do think what has changed, I've seen, is in my early days, if I sold you a pen test, 100% chance we were going to pwn you. And I worked with some really great pen testers, right? So I kind of knew, like, that was part of it, because I've seen some other. We were always, like, doing actual pen tests, not sort of like, the light pen tests or the fake scans or the stuff that, like, oh, we don't need credentials and see what happens if a bad, like, we're doing legitimate pen testing. And later on in my career, after, going to a couple other companies, I had talked to some teams, and it was no longer that way. Where it wasn't always like, if you do a pen test, you're going to get pwned. I think so. A lot of that is probably due to cybersecurity being more visible, more aware, technology. Again, we talked about, back in the day, you had firewalls and IDS and all these different things, and now it all just comes in one box. And, the evolution of SIM and monitoring and all of blue teaming and red teaming, or blue teaming and purple teaming kind of stuff. So I think a lot of that has made businesses more secure, in at least a positive aspect from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So you're a veteran. First, thank you for your service. Second, hopefully you got the Crayola brand crayons in the green room. I made sure they're Crayola for you. With that, how do your early experiences in the Marine Corps shape you as a cybersecurity practitioner and leader?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, the cool thing was, for that is, I'm a big picture guy. So I think that's kind of why I do what I do. I tend to see how everything connects. So the whole, like, head on a swivel, situational awareness, think like a think like the baddies. I think that's part of it. when you're trained to, be looking for terrorists all the time and protecting things and being on high alert, you kind of look at things differently. And I've definitely been in some situations where people have talked about, like, I remember when I was doing OT security, somebody was like, "Oh, what would happen if you had access to this system? What would you do?" And people were like, "Well, I would add salt and mess up the cookie batch, and then they would lose a bunch of money." And I was like, I would turn off all of the regulators that monitor the PSI and flood the thing until bolts started popping and things blew up. And everybody's like, they look at you like you're an evil demon person. I was like, well, no, you think about the worst possible case scenario and then you prepare for it. So I think that has probably helped me, like the being able to like facilitate, see the whole picture, and also having worked in the Marine. Like I had a first responder unit I was at for my last tour, so we did WMD, mass destruction, chemical biological response stuff, and so we trained to see what happens when bad things really happen, like really bad things. And people don't act the way you think you are. So when you have a disaster recovery plan or a continuity plan, and you're like, well, let's simulate the this town blew up and we're going to just, fly everybody over to here. People may not care anymore. Like you can't just fly your help desk to your second location across the country, assuming that they're going to want to even do that. Right. So it's like this whole idea of the actual people element and dealing with like actual catastrophes versus, not that, I mean, ransomware is terrible, but different.
Yeah, I know for me, the institutional paranoia that the military gives you has been very helpful for me in my career. Just looking at something and going, what are the 10 ways this could go horribly, horribly wrong? And then playing for those and hopefully cover some other ones.
100%.
Well, I think that's a really great way to kind of round out this section here of our discussion on like your origin story. So this last question then is like, what's the most misunderstood part of your career journey? Like, what's the thing that people assume about you that isn't true? Maybe it's that story of being like the crazy like bombing guy.
Oddly enough, it's that I'm a cybersecurity person. And I mean that because I've spent so much of my career, like more than half of my career has been in consulting and managed security services. And most of that has been, through CISO advisory, helping with marketing and messaging and content and speaking on stage, evangelizing, solving problems, creating solutions. So while I've worked in cybersecurity, my knowledge is really the business side of it and understanding how to tie it all together. We talk about when I first got into this, I got into it with the intent of being a CISO, and having been a CISO and done that work, I don't want to do that work, right? It's not the job I want anymore. I'd much rather help CISOs, right? I'd much rather help organizations with their products, with their services, with those kinds of things. Because to me, solving problems is the fun part. Figuring out, something that's going wrong, or how do I make this better, or how do we help this organization elevate? So I think just the fact that I'm a creative in a technical field too. That's kind of the other weird part about it. When I create content on LinkedIn, I do all the graphics and the imaging myself. And everybody's like, you should outsource that. And you absolutely should, because it's a ton of work, but it's the part of the job I actually like. So if the one part I don't like, or the one part I like, I don't do, then I'm not going to do it. So I spend a lot of time, playing around in Canva. So I think that's probably the thing, as much as I can sit and talk about cybersecurity, I'm and I have recently been a CISO again, the way things happen, but like that's not my goal in life anymore, right? It's more about helping them and helping organizations that are in our industry, right? So I love doing startup advisory. I love helping organizations bring cool things to the market, help it, and that's something where, that we talked about the blinky lights. That's the challenge. A lot of technical people like, oh, I have this cool idea, and then they don't know what to do with it. I get to help them. I get to be like, well, what's it do? All right, cool. That fits here in the business. And this is why a CEO cares. This is why the COO cares. Here's who you need to talk to. Here's how you need to say the things. Here's the videos you need, like doing all of that stuff and like helping enable them so that they can go off and be successful. Because up to this point, I haven't had some brilliant idea to sit down and start coding and make my own thing. So I just have to piggyback off of the brains of smarter people than me.
So let's take this and kind of switch gears and go kind of more of a top-down leadership focus. What threat trends are you actually worrying about right now? Not the headlines, but the actual things that are happening in real environments, the hard signals.
Worrying about or are interesting. I think CMMC is a big deal. Like I joked about it at the first, but like because it's where it is, and I've seen firsthand the benefit that those organizations get from getting that CMMC compliance.
I've got the book right here.
I mean, so I think that's, and it is interesting how it's going to shake up the DIB kind of, side of the world. Ransomware is still the biggest problem, right? I still think it is. And so there's lots of people coming up with all of these solutions. And I think that's probably where there's a little concern, especially for less experienced leaders or people who are strapped for, resources and all that, kind of getting that shiny thing syndrome, right? Because it's very easy for somebody to oversell something that they have to be and not over deliver on it. And for you as a, the practitioner, owner, whatever, being stuck with something or not getting your value out of it. So I think that's definitely something I see from a concern standpoint too.
I'm just so glad you didn't go with the easy answer and say AI.
Well, I mean, yeah, duh. Talk about it every day. You've implemented it and you didn't put any governance around it. And right now it doesn't matter, but in a couple of years, it probably will. Something will happen and it'll bite you. And, we have no idea what that fallout's going to look like yet. Like we can pontificate and think about it and, run models and stuff. But at the end of the day, something's going to happen. There's going to be not a bubble to burst necessarily, but there's going to be something to happen. And it's going to cause, which is why, like I had Rock on my podcast and he's talking about all the new stuff that CIS was doing around AI. And I thought that was great. So, obviously, yeah, people are paying attention, but technology is moving faster than we can keep up with it from a security standpoint.
Yeah, that seems to always be the case, though. I always feel like security ends up being on the back foot, even though we're all in the loop as much as we can be. But you hit on something that I think is really interesting. You mentioned, not overstating the risk or overselling risk. And when you're talking to your leadership team, like, previously you're like, well, I'm technical when I talk to a CFO, but not to a pen tester. So what's the single biggest communication habit that seems to hold these technical folks like back? Maybe it's the folks that are deeply technical in the SOC, like you mentioned before, or the pen testing teams. Like, is there anything that you see that is a hindrance?
Yeah, it's there's sort of two ways I see it happen a lot. Just generally technical people going to a non-technical audience and not having prepared for that conversation, right? Going in thinking, well, they want to know about our risks, so I'm going to show them all the CVEs and how our patching is. And like, again, they don't care. They want to know, like, what's the short version of it. I think anybody who's been in Kayla, my shoes, and Josh probably done this too, and everybody watching, anybody's ever done an assessment of some kind has gotten to the executive briefing, and there's always somebody's like, just stop. Just tell me the top 3 things I have to deal with, right? They don't care that you have an 80-page report. So I say all that because that's the one thing they have to prepare for. Okay, I have this technical information. What does it mean to the business? And how do I translate that? How do I visualize the data or visualize the risk or get it into where I can still have 30-point font, right? The other side would be even with, and when I was doing my career, I did a presentation on like career planning for cybersecurity at a couple B-sides. And this was something I talked about a lot with people, which was just because the three of us are all technical and understand cybersecurity doesn't mean we all work in the same domain. So Kayla, super smart GRC person, has somebody from the vulnerability management team who living and breathing every day in VM comes up and starts talking to you. Yeah, absolutely. You understand what vulnerability management program is. You understand how it all, but they start throwing acronyms at you that they deal with every day and you don't, like assuming that everybody knows what you know. Because Marcel posted a thing today about, it was just like the technology of like cybersecurity. It wasn't even the whole breadth of cybersecurity. Just the tech stack is huge and crazy and convoluted. So going from identity to SIM to whatever, like a whole very different skill sets, much less GRC. So again, I think that's the other part, is just assuming everybody else lives and breathes in the same world that you do. So it's not always technical to business translation, but technical to technical, right?
So I think that's a great transition into kind of our next question is, you often talk about the need for leaders to understand business before they try to secure it. So what does a business first cybersecurity leadership look like in practice?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we talked about it first. It's asset management, impact analysis, right? You have to know what the mission of the business is. Like, their goals. They should usually, there's 3 or 4 lofty goals every company has, some 3 or 5 year plan. All of that stuff gets pushed down to the C-suite or whatever the top level is. If you're mid-market or smaller, you may not have C-suite. But either way, there's people at the top who are responsible for driving that. And then you take those goals and they get broken down and they're like, okay, the people below them have to do these things and so forth. And so every day, even as an individual contributor, you go in knowing I do this work because it helps my boss achieve their goal and it helps their boss achieve their goal. And it all rolls up and we all know we're working towards the same goal, right? And you take that. So when you understand that, then you look at, okay, what are the systems that we have in place that enable this, right? So strategy 101, the zoom in, zoom out, which is what do we need to do? Okay, what's preventing us from doing that? Document that out. Great. Now that is a strategic goal. Go build the tactics around it, execute on it. It's the same way with risk. So figuring out, okay, what's important? How do we take care of it? How do we, the basics of it. If this machine goes down, we lose $100 a minute. Okay, well, it'll cost us $250,000 a year to stop that from happening. It runs 24 hours a day, so that's easy math. Let's do it, right? Versus, hey, this thing goes down, we lose 25 cents. It doesn't matter. Well, okay, then we don't pay to protect it, but make sure that it doesn't get to anything else, right? What happens if it is compromised? So I think that business first approach is less about the technical and more about what matters to the business. And I think people struggle because, again, we've all done assessments. You go in and, CIO, CISO will say, hey, oh, you're going to talk, I'll use PCI. You're going to talk about our PCI process. Cool. Bob does that. All right. I'll talk to Bob. 2 minutes talking to Bob. He's like, well, wait, Mary does this other thing. And then Mary comes in the room and 5 minutes talking to Mary. She goes to get Jane. And the next thing, 20 minutes into this, well, Bob does everything for PCI. Now I've got 15 people in the room that all are having their hands in their PCI data flow, right? Or whatever this process data flow is. And so I always say, I jokingly, but it's true, everything is done in 3 ways. There's the way that it is documented, there's the way management thinks it's done, and then there's the way it's actually done.
Without a doubt. That has been my experience in my entire career. You have the documentation and the practice are rarely, congruent with each other.
Right. Data flow is so important. So.
Yep. I feel that as a former auditor, I do need to agree with you here. Having taken like policies and processes and trying to do the mapping, it's ticking and tying as they call it. And back in my day, did not work very well at all. I think that's just universal, because if there's an easier way to do something, people are going to do it. And that's where security and privacy professionals have to come in and tighten those things up a bit. That's like the basics, as we said before.
It's a resource constraint too. I mean, that's the other part. Like, I don't think any company out there has the money to actually hire all of the people they should to be able to, because you need a GRC program manager And then if you're dealing with multiple frameworks, you might need specific, program managers just for those frameworks. And you might need, I know a large healthcare organization I worked with before in the past, they had a technical GRC team. Their job was to just make sure that the technology was compliant with, the frameworks they do. That's all they did. They had 10 people to do that, right? And then you've got organizations where that's well, I've got Joe, he's the IT guy, and he also does our cybersecurity. So
yeah. So saying that, then I think that's a really good kind of concept to kind of poke at a little bit. So if you could build a defensive stack from scratch with only 3 capabilities, what would they be and why?
With only 3.
Yeah, because I want to make it difficult.
Well, the first thing is if I'm not a Fortune 100 company, I'm going to find a managed security provider that I trust. First off the bat, the idea of building and running your own SOC is maddening to me. I don't understand.
Yes, I did that. Yes. Yep.
Just to trust, just to be able to have 3 shifts covered, to have talent that wants to stay there, retain them, train them, and have career planning. I mean, it's a job for a company who only does that, because it's easier for those companies because if you're a SOC analyst, do you want to go to work every day and look at the same data for 20 years? Or do you want to look at a retail company today and a healthcare company tomorrow and maybe do some little bit of, and be able to move around and things like that, right? So it's more enticing. But now that I've skirted your question, I think basically that's what I would look at an MDR type of solution, right? If I get my network and my endpoint visibility, I would have I would have a zero trust strategy in place and the technology to support that. I think having a zero trust strategy and actually implementing that and managing that, that leads into one of the most important things, which is access controls, right? And then depending on what I'm doing, well, you have to have incident response capabilities. That's the other. I want to say data protection to a degree, but I need to have incident response. I need to at least have a retainer and a plan and do tabletops and know what I'm going to have to deal with when the bad stuff happens.
Yeah,
you want to talk to your IR before you actually
before it happens. So I don't pay $500 an hour for it.
No, but it's interesting because the first 2 things that you said were managed. An MSP or MSSP and an MDR. It's outsourcing to people who can do it for you. That's there. I think it's really interesting because there is, and this is probably a different topic, but managed GRC is becoming a thing as well.
Yeah, I've sold program management to a lot. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Yeah. So it's outsource the stuff that you're not good at and focus on the things that you IAM and zero trust, in-house. So that's your people. So I think that's, and then obviously incident response. Near and dear to Josh and I.
And for me, I'm a strategic person, not a tactical person. So, and that's usually what I've seen in my experience in the consulting managed services world. You outsource one or the other. If you do want all of the technical stuff and you're going to build your own SOC, you're probably going to bring somebody in to do the strategy and the big picture and build your roadmap for you at least, or do manage GRC, something like that. Or you're no, we just want to focus on the big picture and outsource the other stuff. And so for me, it's a matter of what can you afford to do, right? At the end of the day.
All right. Absolutely. So keeping with that strategic theme, what metrics actually resonate with executive teams, and what traditional cybersecurity metrics should we retire because they don't translate to any business value whatsoever?
Okay. So this is where that flow down is important, because to the individual contributor who's running a vulnerability management program, absolutely, patch compliance, how many days of has that high critical thing been out there? Has it been validated and tested to actually be high? All of those little data points are very important to them. They are less important to the board. The board wants to know what that means to the business, right? And so I think that is really, it's not a matter of there's a specific set of cybersecurity metrics that we use. It's about what's important to who. So it's translating that, if if your CISO tells the rest of the C-suite we are at 98% compliance with patching, or we are at 20% compliance with patching, the rest of the suite probably doesn't care, because they're like, well, what does it mean? What does it matter to me, right? But if they say the HRIS system or our financial mainframe is at high risk of being, vulnerable to an attack by Lapsus or one of these groups that's out here, whatever, and they're targeting us, if we don't do anything about it, we're going to lose $20 million. That's important to them, right? So I think that's more about what it is. It's putting the metrics in the right framework. And this is something I've talked to a lot of people about too, and they struggle with it because that person who's doing the vulnerability stuff, like they're vulnerability people. They're really smart about that. They don't necessarily understand how to translate that. So their leadership has to be able to coach them to figure that out. And even then, like, you get directors, VPs who, because we just tend to promote the best technical person and then not teach them how to lead. And we don't go send them and get an MBA, so they don't, you learn how to manage a P&L after you've been in the industry for 20 years and somebody gives you one. So I think a lot of that is really like just taking that different mindset at it.
Yeah, to your point, the metrics only matter if you can appropriately contextualize them to something that people care about. The bits and bytes don't matter as much as the dollars and cents.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just mentioned the board of directors, which I think is, if you're new into security, which I just picked up some stuff in the chat with some folks that are a little bit on the newer side. The board of the directors is so far removed from everything that is happening boots on ground that you're going to be doing day to day. So you have to be able to talk to them up, but also interpret what they're saying down. And what I'm seeing from my clients right now is we have a board mandate or an executive leadership team mandate to use AI. It's AI or bust, right? And I don't necessarily think everybody knows what that means. So, in your opinion, what's the biggest lie that companies are telling themselves about AI?
I think it is that. It's funny because I've literally had that conversation probably every at least once a week for the last year. Like, clients like, hey, we have to use AI. And I'm like, great, what do you want to do with it? Well, we don't know. Or, hey, can you deploy ABC? Well, sure, we can deploy it, but what are you going to do with it? Right. And it just goes back fundamentally about saying, okay, look, you see AI is out there and yes, there are benefits to it, but you have to go and look at your business processes first, right? So like it did that that's the first thing. It's like, well, okay, let's do a workshop, bring in the people that want to use the AI and ask them what they're going to do with it. What do they think is going to happen with it? And then you can build the governance around it, and you can build education and training and put that out there. I think that's a big issue. The other thing that you're probably seeing the same thing too is I talk to a lot of leaders and they'll be like, well, we don't really have AI in house, but people use their own GPTs or whatever, we let them have access to it and they're just using it to write emails. And we're like, no, like you have no idea that Sally Smith down the road in your finance department or in HR happens to be consuming AI content on YouTube all day long and loves it and is obsessed with it and has optimized all of these processes for her job because it makes her life easier. You just assume that because you're not actually going out and talking to the teams, or you're not seeing that because there are absolutely, every organization has super users. I guarantee, like in pockets you don't even know exist.
Yeah, from my perspective, I kind of think the biggest lie that organizations tell themselves about AI is that you're not already using it and it's not already being implemented in your organization.
Shadow AI is a thing, like really bad, big time.
So if every security leader had mastered just one tech to business translation skill before we hit the end of the year, 2020, the beginning of 2026, what would that be, and why do you think that would be the most important?
Tech to business translation skill. You need to find a way to quantify risk. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it depending on your industry and what you're working in. But at the end of the day, every security leader, every technology leader should have a roadmap of this is what we want to do next year, or maybe even 18, 36 months. You should have a plan. It should be prioritized, and you should be able to tie budget to it. And the way you get that budget is by going, this is the risk, this is the cost. I need the money to do these things, right? And that's it, because if you go to the CFO and say, hey, I want to buy this shiny box, he's going to be like, why? Because it beep, beep, boop, 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 boop. No, man, he's not going to understand what you're saying. You can't R2D to it. You have to C3PO it. So.
Oh, I like that. That's a good one. I think that goes with the theme to the music and everything too. So I think that was
right, yeah,
really
I've got good. Chopper in the background. So.
Ah.
A little awesome. War criminal.
Well, with that, let's kind of talk a little bit about, the cybersecurity industry for a second. We've been in it for a long time, where all of us, I know, are mentoring folks that are just coming into the field now, or just kind of, exploring around. So if you could fix one thing about the cybersecurity industry overnight, what would it be?
This is going to be so obvious, but we need entry-level positions. Right.
Why do we need entry-level positions, Will?
Because when you and I did this, we were skilled in IT, and then they gave us the keys to security. Like, that's kind of how it worked, right? Mm-hmm. You had to have foundational stuff for networking, and you had to know how the technology worked before you could secure it. And I'm not saying there are not entry-level roles, but traditionally, the way people would learn security was going to a consulting firm, right? Your big four would hire people right out of college. And Josh, you probably know this better than others. A lot of, like, again, when I went to school, there was no cybersecurity degrees. And even the ones out there now, like a lot of the lesson plans are really flyover type of stuff, right? It doesn't really give you practitioner level stuff. And that's what entry level security is. Like, no, you're banging on the keyboard, you're managing firewalls, you're doing audits, whatever it is. You have to understand the technology you're auditing. You have to be able to engineer GRC today, right? AJ, shout out. So I think that's kind of what happens is we, man, I talked about this a long time ago. I wrote a blog post about it. I'm gonna have to resurrect it, but I look at it as a farm system, like in baseball, right? If everybody contributes to the industry and says, we're all going to take on a couple of newbies every year, we know they're going to leave and go to other places, and some aren't going to pan out. But overall, that's how we build up the capability and we build up the staffing. Because right now we have a big problem. I think just like every other industry, the staffing model is a diamond, right? There's the majority of the need is in the big part of the diamond, and there's a little bit of room at the top, and there's a little bit of room at the bottom. So it's really hard to get in, and then it's really hard to hang around once you're like old like me, right? So we have to be able to build up that funnel capability, because the people in the middle are moving towards the top. And that middle is probably going to get bigger and bigger, especially with things like AI, because while AI is making the entry-level work easier, or the tier 1 stuff easier, it now requires more people of advanced skill to make sure the AI is actually doing things right, and make sure the AI is it's the same thing in development's the same way. We saw where the workforce thing diagram came out, like skills that are going to be needed in 5 to 10 years. And programming is like way down here now, and AI is way up here, but like the ones in programming that can do AI are going to be really needed. It's just a smaller group of them. So I think we have the same thing in security. We have to find a way to get more people involved, and you need to be trained. Like I'm not gatekeeping anybody. I definitely think it's just, you can learn skills. There's so much broad and diverse. You don't even have to be like super technical to work into some of the areas. If you can learn a trade, it's basically like learning a trade. We can teach you how to push the buttons. You have to understand the concepts, but you can't just come in and like expect to, nobody's gonna let you manage a firewall day one with no background, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So keeping in kind of that same thought process, what's one practice, it can be technical, cultural, or you can give me one of each, that you wish organizations would stop immediately?
Oh, only one?
Okay, I give you the option for two. You can do a technical and a cultural.
No, well, because there's a whole lot of it's part of it's our fault or some of us in positions of and some of it is the business, but basically like there's too many organizations where security is not part of the process at the beginning, right? And that's what creates the problem. So this whole idea that like security is the no people is because if you go out and shop for a new HRIS system or an LMS, labor management system or whatever, and you do all that without the CISO's knowledge, then you want to, bring it on and you tell the CIO to plug it in. Well, the CISO is going to have some questions about the security of it and probably the vendor and how they're patching it and all. There's so at the end of the day, but if you bring them in at the beginning, they can ask all those questions. It can be part of the vetting process. So something as simple as procurement, systems acquisitions, if there's security people involved at the beginning, then the process is fine. Like, we are part of the solution and we can help you move faster. If you take us out of the process or try to work around us because you don't want us to tell you no, then that's where the pain points come in. So I think that's probably like everybody needs to kumbaya, hold hands, and realize we're all in this together. Like,
So, where can we find you, Wil? And any last thoughts?
Yeah. So LinkedIn / Wil Klu, WILKLU. It's only one L. And if you Google me or whatever, I'm sure I have a website, wilklu.me. If you want to see some of my services and things I'm doing there. I run a podcast called Keyboard Samurai. Josh was actually my first guest. We just hit a year of about almost 5,000 followers. I think we're like 4.8 or something today. That is something where we talk about the industry. So it's to help people either like us working in the industry or people running cybersecurity businesses or, SaaS or B2B products and things like that. So we talk about everything from, marketing and positioning to actual technical stuff and, business translation, all that kind of stuff. So kind of, for me, it's the business of cybersecurity and technology most of the time, less of the technical.
Oh, thank you so much for being our guest, Wil. It's really great to have you on my first podcast. So it was awesome to have that as a full circle moment.
Nice.
You've been absolutely amazing. Caleb?
Yeah, thank you, Wil, and for dealing with me butchering your last name. I apologize. Oh, so I'm Kayla Williams now, but I was Kayla Jamidi, so I'm Greek, so I completely get it. So I'm very like self-aware. So,
No worries. You did quite well. And I love this. This was a great time. I really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you so much.